The dust storm had already taken 3 lives in Eagar, Arizona, that summer of 1883, and Josephine Grant wasn't about to become the 4th, even though some days the loneliness inside her chest felt like suffocation enough. She stood behind the counter of her dry goods store, watching the red dust whirl past the window like angry spirits, her hands mechanically counting coins she'd already counted twice while her mind wandered to places it shouldn't go, places where women like her, 23 and unmarried with no family left, simply didn't have the luxury of dreaming about anymore. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up expecting old Mrs. Henderson or perhaps one of the ranch hands looking to get out of the wind. Instead, a man she'd never seen before stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, shaking dust from his hat with hands that looked capable and sure. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water after a storm, gray-green and searching. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying the rough edges of a man who spent more time talking to horses than people. "Store still open?" "It is," Josephine replied, straightening her spine the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her 5 years back. "Though if you're looking for somewhere to wait out the storm, the saloon's got better company." Something flickered across his face, amusement maybe or recognition of something in her tone. "Not much for drinking in the afternoon. Besides, I need supplies. Heading up to the ranch north of here, the Diamond Cross. They just hired me on." Josephine knew the Diamond Cross. Everyone in Eagar knew the Diamond Cross. It was the biggest spread in the territory, running thousands of head of cattle across land that stretched from the White Mountains to the Salt Flats. She'd sold supplies to their hands for 3 years now, ever since her father died and left her this store and the small house behind it, the only thing standing between her and complete destitution. "I can help with that," she said, reaching for her order pad. "What do you need?" He stepped closer to the counter and she caught the smell of leather and sage, something clean despite the dust coating his clothes. "Name's Benjamin Jackson, and I need pretty much everything. Bedroll, extra socks, tobacco if you've got it, some of that jerky you got hanging up there, coffee, and I reckon I should probably get some soap too." The way he said the last part, almost sheepish, made something in Josephine's chest tighten unexpectedly. She'd spent 3 years selling supplies to cowboys, and most of them couldn't have cared less about soap. "You're new to the territory," she observed, pulling down the items he'd requested. "Oklahoma originally," Benjamin said, watching her work with an attention that made her conscious of her movements. "Worked ranches there most of my life, but there's not much left after the land rushes. Figured I'd try my luck out west." Josephine set the items on the counter, her fingers brushing his as she handed him the tobacco, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, brief as lightning and just as surprising. She pulled her hand back quickly, focusing on tallying the numbers in her ledger. "That'll be $8.40, she said. Benjamin counted out the money, placing it carefully on the counter. "You run this place yourself?" "I do." "That's impressive. Can't be easy." Josephine looked up at him then, really looked at him, searching for the mockery she'd learned to expect from men who thought a woman running a business was either a joke or an opportunity. But his eyes held only genuine respect, maybe even admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. "It's a living," she said softly. "It's more than that," Benjamin replied. "It's independence. That's worth something." The words hit her harder than they should have, burrowing into that hollow place inside her she'd learned to ignore. She busied herself wrapping his purchases, aware of his gaze on her face, her hands, the way her hair had escaped its pins during the long day. "Storm's getting worse," she said, glancing at the window where the dust had turned the afternoon dark as twilight. "You might want to wait it out here. I've got chairs in the back, coffee on the stove." Benjamin's expression shifted, softening. "I'd appreciate that, Miss Grant. Josephine Grant." "Miss Grant," he repeated, and the way he said her name felt like something precious being handled with care. They moved to the back room where Josephine kept a small stove and two worn chairs her father had made decades ago. She poured coffee into tin cups, and they sat while the wind howled outside like something alive and angry. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence felt heavy with something Josephine couldn't name, something that made her aware of how small the room was, how close he sat, how long it had been since anyone had shared this space with her. "You've been alone a long time," Benjamin said finally, not a question but a statement of fact, gentle as anything. Josephine's hands tightened around her cup. "My mother died 5 years ago. Father followed 2 years later. There's no one else. I'm sorry, don't be, it's just how things are." But her voice betrayed her, cracking slightly on the last word, and she cursed herself for the weakness. Benjamin leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his cup cradled between his palms. "My folks died when I was 15. Cholera. I've got a sister somewhere back east, married to a banker, but we don't write much. I understand about being alone. Do you?" The words came out sharper than she intended, years of carefully constructed walls suddenly brittle in the face of his kindness. "Do you really understand what it's like to go weeks without having a real conversation? To eat every meal in silence, to sleep in an empty house and wake up knowing the day ahead holds nothing but more of the same? To watch families come into your store, watch them laugh and argue and exist together, and know that's something you'll never have." She stopped abruptly, shocked at herself. She'd never said those things out loud, never admitted even to herself how deep the loneliness went, how it had become like a second skin she wore, so familiar she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Benjamin didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. He just watched her with those storm-colored eyes, and then he said, "Yes, I do understand, because I've felt it too every damn day for the last 11 years. The honesty in his voice broke something open inside her, something that had been locked up tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back furiously, but one escaped anyway, trailing hot down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know why I said all that. Don't apologize." Benjamin reached across the small space between them, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching, asking permission. "Sometimes the truth just needs to come out." Josephine looked at his hand, rough and scarred from years of hard work, and something in her chest loosened. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. They sat like that while the storm raged outside, two lonely people holding onto each other like a lifeline. And for the first time in years, Josephine felt something shift inside her, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The storm finally broke near evening, the dust settling back to earth as suddenly as it had risen. Benjamin released her hand slowly, reluctantly, and stood. "I should get to the ranch," he said. "They'll be wondering where I am." Josephine stood too, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "Yes, of course." He gathered his supplies, pausing at the door. "Miss Grant, would it be all right if I came back? To the store, I mean. I'm sure I'll need things." The hope in his voice matched the wild flutter in her chest. "The store's open 6 days a week. You're welcome anytime." "I'll remember that." He settled his hat on his head, then paused again. "Thank you for the coffee and the conversation." "Thank you," Josephine said softly, and meant it more than he could possibly know. After he left, she stood at the window watching his figure disappear down the dusty street. and she realized she was crying, not from sadness but from something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name but felt like hope, like the first rain after a long drought, like waking up from a dream she hadn't known she was having. She had not known she was lonely until Benjamin Jackson showed her what not lonely felt like, and the recognition of it, the sudden understanding of just how empty her life had been, made her weep. The next 3 days passed in a strange haze. Josephine went through her usual routines, opening the store at dawn, taking inventory, helping customers, but everything felt different now, colored by the memory of Benjamin's hand holding hers, his voice saying he understood. She caught herself watching the door, listening for the bell, her heart jumping every time it chimed, only to deflate when it was someone else. On the 4th day, when she'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the connection between them, that she'd been foolish to hope for anything more, Benjamin walked through the door carrying wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. "I found these up in the high country," he said, suddenly looking uncertain, younger than his years. "Thought you might like them." Josephine took the flowers with trembling hands. They were simple, purple and yellow blooms she didn't recognize, but they were the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her. "They're lovely." "They reminded me of you," Benjamin said. "Pretty but tough, surviving in hard country." She laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "I don't know if I should be flattered or insulted. Definitely flattered." His smile transformed his face, making him almost boyish. "Miss Grant, I was wondering if you might have dinner with me tonight. There's a restaurant down the street, nothing fancy, but the food's decent." Josephine's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself, to retreat behind her walls. But then she remembered how good it had felt to not be alone, how right it had felt to sit with him in the storm, and she heard herself say, "I'd like that very much." His smile widened, and she saw relief and joy chase across his features. 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock, she agreed. The day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Josephine closed the store at 5, rushing to her small house to change into her best dress, a blue calico her mother had helped her make years ago. She brushed and repinned her hair 3 times, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror and wondering what Benjamin saw when he looked at her. She was plain. She'd always known that, with brown hair and brown eyes and no remarkable features. But when Benjamin looked at her, she felt like maybe plain was enough, maybe even more than enough. He was waiting outside the restaurant at precisely 6 o'clock, cleaned up and wearing a shirt that looked freshly pressed. He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric. The restaurant was small but clean, run by a Mexican family who'd lived in Arizona longer than most of the white settlers. They served beef and beans and tortillas, and Josephine couldn't remember food ever tasting so good, though whether that was the cooking or the company, she couldn't say. "Tell me about Oklahoma," she said, wanting to know everything about him. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, his eyes going distant. "It's different from here. Greener, more trees, but crowded now, too many people fighting over too little land. My parents had a small farm, nothing special, but it was ours. After they died, I tried to keep it going, but I was just a kid. Eventually, I had to sell it, went to work for other ranchers, spent 10 years drifting from place to place, never really belonging anywhere. And now I'm here," he said, his eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And for the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe I could belong somewhere. You've only been here a few days. I know." His voice dropped lower. "But sometimes you just know, don't you? When something feels right." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Sometimes you know." They talked until the restaurant owner politely suggested they might want to leave so he could close up. Outside, the night air was cool, the sky brilliant with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Benjamin walked her home slowly, taking the long way around the edge of town. "I should tell you something," he said as they approached her house. "The ranch foreman, he said I could have Sundays off. I was thinking maybe I could spend them here, in town. With you if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Josephine said, and felt like she was agreeing to something much bigger than just Sunday visits. At her door, Benjamin took off his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Miss Grant, Josephine, I don't want to presume anything, but I need you to know. When I walked into your store when I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like we were both looking for the same thing without knowing it. What were we looking for?" She asked, though she thought she knew. "Home," he said simply. "Not a place, but a person. Someone to belong to." Tears pricked at her eyes again, but she didn't try to hide them this time. "I thought I'd gotten used to being alone. I thought I was fine with it. But then you came in and you held my hand, and suddenly I realized I wasn't fine at all. I've been so lonely, Benjamin, so terribly lonely." He stepped closer, reaching up to brush away a tear with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "You don't have to be lonely anymore. Not if you don't want to be." "I don't," she whispered. "I don't want to be lonely anymore." Benjamin leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. His lips touched hers, soft and careful, asking rather than taking, and Josephine felt the last of her walls crumble. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to court you properly," he said. "I'm going to do this right." "I'd like that," Josephine said, smiling through her tears. True to his word, Benjamin came to town every Sunday after that first week. They would have breakfast together, then walk to church, then spend the afternoon exploring the country around Eagar or simply sitting on Josephine's porch talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the Oklahoma farm, about learning to rope cattle from an old Mexican vaquero, about the time he'd been thrown from a horse and broken his arm in 2 places. She told him about her parents, about learning to run the store, about the dreams she'd had as a girl of traveling east to see the ocean, dreams she'd set aside when reality demanded more practical ambitions. "We could go together someday," Benjamin said. "See the ocean, I mean, if you wanted to." The casual way he included himself in her future made her heart swell. "I'd like that." The weeks turned into months, summer fading into fall. The whole town noticed their courtship, and Josephine endured the knowing looks and whispered comments with surprising grace. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what people thought. She was too happy, too full of joy that spilled over into every aspect of her life. The store seemed brighter, her customers more pleasant, the days shorter because she spent them anticipating Sunday. Benjamin was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but the heat between them grew with each passing week. His kisses became less careful, more passionate, and Josephine found herself wanting more, wanting everything, wanting to belong to him completely. One Sunday in October, Benjamin arrived at her store earlier than usual, looking nervous. He paced the length of the counter 3 times before finally stopping and looking at her. "I need to ask you something," he said. Josephine's heart leaped into her throat. "All right." "I've been saving my wages. The foreman says I'm doing good work, says he'll make me a junior foreman next spring if I keep it up. That comes with better pay and a house, a small one, but it's got 2 rooms and a good roof." He paused, swallowing hard. "What I'm trying to say is, I could support a wife. I could give her a decent life." "Benjamin," Josephine whispered. He dropped to one knee right there behind the counter, pulling a small box from his pocket. Josephine Grace Grant, I was alone for so long I forgot what it felt like to be whole. And then I walked into your store and everything changed. You changed me. You made me want to be better, to build something real and lasting. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Will you marry me? The tears came then, streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, yes, Benjamin, I'll marry you. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small stone that caught the light, and it was the most precious thing she'd ever owned. How soon? He asked against her lips. How soon can we get married? As soon as you want, Josephine said. Tomorrow, if possible. He laughed, a sound of pure joy. Let's at least wait until we can get the preacher. Next Sunday. Next Sunday, she agreed. The week that followed was a blur of preparations. Josephine had no family to invite and Benjamin had none nearby, so they kept it simple. She made herself a new dress, white cotton with lace at the collar that she'd been saving for years without knowing what for. Benjamin arranged for the preacher and reserved the church. Mrs. Henderson and a few of the other town women helped Josephine prepare food for a small reception afterward, and the whole town seemed caught up in the excitement of it. The night before the wedding, Josephine sat alone in her house for the last time, looking around at the rooms that had felt like a prison of loneliness for so long. Tomorrow she would leave this place and move to the Diamond Cross, start a new life as Benjamin's wife. The thought filled her with such overwhelming happiness she could barely contain it. There was a knock at the door, and she opened it to find Benjamin standing there, looking uncertain. I know it's not proper for me to be here, he said. But I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow, about you. I just wanted to see you. Josephine pulled him inside, propriety be damned. They sat together on the settee, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? That I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream, that I'll be alone again. Benjamin tightened his arms around her. This is real, Josephine, I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise you, for the rest of my life, you'll never be alone again. I love you, she whispered. I don't think I even knew what love was until I met you. I love you too. He kissed the top of her head, more than words can say. They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Josephine felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was right. This was real. This was home. The wedding took place on a Sunday morning in mid-October, the air crisp and cool, the sky an impossible blue. Josephine walked down the aisle of the small church alone, carrying wildflowers like the ones Benjamin had given her that first time. He stood at the altar looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple. They exchanged vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives. When Benjamin slipped the ring on her finger and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Josephine felt like something fundamental shifted in the universe, like everything that had come before was just prologue to this moment. Benjamin kissed her thoroughly, not caring that the whole town was watching, and the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the restaurant where they'd had their first dinner. People brought food and well wishes, and for a few hours, Josephine felt surrounded by community in a way she never had before. But the best part was Benjamin's hand holding hers, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, the quiet promise in his eyes of the life they would build together. As the sun began to set, they rode out to the Diamond Cross together, Josephine sitting in front of Benjamin on his horse, wrapped in his arms. The small house the ranch provided wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it was clean and sturdy, and Benjamin had spent the week making it ready for her. There were curtains on the windows, a new quilt on the bed, and wildflowers in a jar on the table. "It's not much," Benjamin said, suddenly uncertain, "but I'll make it better. I'll work hard, save money, and someday I'll build you a real house, something fine." Josephine turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek in her hand. "This is already more than I ever dreamed of having." "You're more than I ever dreamed of having." He picked her up and carried her across the threshold, setting her down gently in the middle of the room. For a moment they just looked at each other, the weight of the moment settling around them. "I'm your wife," Josephine said wonderingly. "And I'm your husband," Benjamin replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For the rest of our lives." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Josephine felt herself melt into him. They moved to the bedroom, nervous and eager and so full of love it felt like it might overflow. Benjamin was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and ready. When they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, 2 people who had been incomplete finding wholeness in each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future. Benjamin wanted to work his way up to foreman eventually, maybe even save enough to buy land of his own someday. Josephine wanted to keep the store going, at least for a while, and maybe start a family when they were ready. "I want children with you," Benjamin said, his hand resting on her stomach. "Little girls with your eyes, little boys to teach to rope and ride." "Not too many," Josephine said, laughing. "Maybe 3 or 4. 3 or 4 sounds perfect," he kissed her forehead. "Everything about you is perfect." "I'm not perfect, Benjamin." "You're perfect for me," he insisted. "You're everything I need." Josephine burrowed closer to him, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid reality of him beside her. "I was so lonely before you came," she whispered. "I didn't even realize how bad it was until you showed me what it felt like to not be lonely. That first day when you held my hand in the storm, something in me woke up. I went home and cried because I finally understood what I'd been missing all those years." Benjamin's arms tightened around her. "I know exactly what you mean. I'd been going through the motions of living for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually be alive. And then I saw you, and it was like someone lit a lamp in a dark room. Suddenly, I could see all the possibilities, all the things life could be if I just had the courage to reach for them." "I'm so glad you walked into my store that day," Josephine said. "So am I," Benjamin replied. "Best decision I ever made, getting caught in that dust storm." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Josephine didn't wake once during the night. She slept deeply and peacefully, knowing she was safe and loved and home. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and routines, figuring out how to be together. Benjamin left before dawn to work the ranch, and Josephine rose early to ride into town and open the store. They met for lunch when they could, and every evening Benjamin would come to town to ride home with her, the 2 of them talking about their days as they made the journey back to the Diamond Cross. Josephine discovered that Benjamin sang while he worked, old cowboy songs and hymns he'd learned as a boy. She learned that he couldn't cook to save his life, but would happily wash dishes while she prepared their meals. He learned that she was fiercely independent but softened like butter when he kissed the back of her neck while she was cooking. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, remnants of a hard childhood, and that he slept better when she held him. They were learning each other, piece by piece, building something solid and real. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and blanketing the high country in white. The ranch work slowed. though the cattle still needed tending, and Benjamin spent more time helping around the store, hauling supplies and making deliveries to outlying ranches. They worked side by side, and Josephine marveled at how natural it felt, how right, to have a partner in both life and work. Christmas arrived, and they celebrated quietly in their small house, exchanging modest gifts. Benjamin gave her a beautiful shawl he'd ordered from a catalog, soft wool dyed a deep blue. Josephine gave him a new saddle blanket she'd woven herself, working on it in secret over the past weeks. But the real gift was simply being together, not lonely, not alone, but part of something bigger than themselves. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," Benjamin said as they sat by the fire, Josephine curled against his side. "Mine too," she agreed. "Every day with you is a gift, Benjamin. Even the hard ones." "There'll be hard days ahead," he said seriously. "Life out here isn't easy, but I promise you whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," Josephine repeated, and the word felt like a vow, like a prayer, like everything she'd ever wanted summed up in one simple syllable. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new changes to their lives. Benjamin was promoted to junior foreman just as promised, with a raise in pay that made their future feel more secure. And Josephine discovered she was pregnant, a fact that filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. "I don't know anything about babies," Benjamin said, his hand resting on her still flat stomach with a mixture of awe and fear. "Neither do I," Josephine admitted, "but we'll figure it out together." "Together," he echoed, kissing her softly. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Josephine's fears. She continued working at the store through the summer, though Benjamin fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more, to take it easy. Mrs. Henderson and the other town women rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, and the kind of community support Josephine had never experienced before. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon, patting Josephine's hand. "We take care of our own." The words brought tears to Josephine's eyes. One of them. Part of something. Not alone anymore. The baby came in early September, a girl with dark hair and gray-green eyes like her father. The birth was hard. Hours of labor that left Josephine exhausted and Benjamin nearly out of his mind with worry. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in Josephine's arms, all the pain faded away, replaced by overwhelming love. "She's perfect," Benjamin whispered, touching his daughter's tiny hand with one finger. "She's absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Josephine asked. They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Benjamin said, "Grace, after your middle name, Grace Elizabeth Jackson." Tears streamed down Josephine's cheeks. "It's perfect. She's perfect." Benjamin gathered both his wife and daughter into his arms, careful of Josephine's exhaustion. "I love you both so much. My girls. My family. Family." The words settled around them like a blessing. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Grace was a fussy baby who didn't sleep well, and Josephine spent long nights pacing the floor with her, singing softly and wondering if she was doing anything right. Benjamin helped when he could, taking the baby so Josephine could rest, learning to change diapers and warm milk with the same patient determination he brought to everything. They were in it together, figuring it out as they went, and somehow that made all the difference. Josephine had to close the store for several months after Grace was born, focusing on recovering and caring for the baby. She worried about losing business, about the store failing, but Benjamin reassured her. "We'll make it work," he said. "We've got my wages and we've been saving. The store will still be there when you're ready to go back." And it was. When Grace was 4 months old and sleeping a bit better, Josephine reopened the store 3 days a week, bringing the baby with her. She set up a cradle behind the counter, and Grace would sleep or coo at customers while Josephine worked. The town women loved it, stopping by just to see the baby and offer advice that Josephine learned to take with a grain of salt. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from before but just as good. Better, even, because now they were 3 instead of 2, a real family. Grace's first birthday arrived faster than seemed possible, and they celebrated with a small party at the house. A few families from the ranch came, along with Mrs. Henderson and some others from town. Grace smashed her fist into a cake Josephine had made, getting frosting everywhere, and everyone laughed at her delighted expression. "Happy?" Benjamin asked Josephine later as they cleaned up while Grace napped. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josephine replied honestly. "2 years ago I was so lonely I could barely stand it, and now look at us. Look at what we've built." Benjamin pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly. "We've only just begun, Josie. We've got a whole lifetime ahead of us." "I can't wait to see what comes next," she said. What came next was another pregnancy, announced in the spring when Grace was 18 months old. This time Josephine felt more prepared, less scared, though Benjamin still fussed over her relentlessly. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in November she gave birth to a boy they named William Benjamin Jackson, strong and healthy with his mother's brown eyes. "Now we've got one of each," Benjamin said, holding his son while Grace toddled around the bedroom, curious about her new brother. "3 or 4, remember," Josephine said, laughing. "We might not be done yet." "Fine by me," Benjamin replied, his face soft with love as he looked at his growing family. They were done expanding their family for a few years, focusing on raising the 2 children they had and building Benjamin's career. He became full foreman of the Diamond Cross when Grace was 4 and William was 2, a position that came with significant responsibility and better pay. The ranch owner, impressed by Benjamin's work and dedication, offered him a partnership deal, the chance to buy into the ranch over time and eventually become part owner. "It's everything I dreamed of," Benjamin told Josephine. "The chance to really build something, to give our children a legacy. But it means taking on debt, working even harder. I won't do it unless you're with me." Josephine didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, always." They took the partnership, and Benjamin threw himself into the work with renewed energy. The next few years were hard, long days and short nights, worry about money and weather and cattle prices. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. On the nights when Benjamin came home exhausted and discouraged, Josephine would hold him and remind him of how far they'd come, of everything they'd built together. And when Josephine felt overwhelmed by managing the store and caring for the children and keeping up with the household, Benjamin would take the children outside to play, giving her space to breathe, to remember who she was beyond wife and mother. They were partners in every sense of the word, and their love only grew deeper with time. Grace grew into a bright, curious girl who loved horses and wanted to learn everything about the ranch. William was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with his mother in the store and help organize supplies. Josephine loved watching them grow, discovering their personalities and interests, becoming real people. "You think they know how lucky they are?" Benjamin asked one evening as they watched the children play in the yard. "Lucky how?" Josephine asked. "To have a family, to never know what it's like to be alone." Josephine leaned into her husband's side. "I hope they never do know. I hope they always have people who love them, who make them feel not lonely." "They will," Benjamin said firmly. "We'll make sure of it." When Grace was 7 and William was 5, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that delighted them both. She was 32 now, a bit older than ideal for childbearing, but healthy and strong. The pregnancy progressed well, and in the spring she gave birth to another girl, tiny and perfect with blonde hair that came from some distant relative on Benjamin's side. "Anna," Josephine said when she first held her. "Anna Hope Jackson." "Hope," Benjamin repeated, smiling, "because that's what you gave me, hope for a future I didn't think I could have." "We gave each other hope," Josephine corrected him. 3 children kept them busy, but they loved every chaotic minute of it. Their small house felt cramped now, and Benjamin started making plans to build something bigger. A real home with enough rooms for everyone and a porch where they could sit together in the evenings. The years continued to pass, marked by small milestones and everyday joys. Grace learned to rope and ride alongside her father, becoming a skilled horsewoman by the time she was 10. William discovered a love of reading and numbers, already talking about maybe becoming a banker or accountant someday. Anna was their wild child, fearless and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Benjamin's partnership in the Diamond Cross flourished, his hard work paying off in increased profits and respect from the other ranchers in the territory. He bought more land, expanded their cattle operation, and slowly built their small fortune. The new house was completed when Anna was 3, a beautiful structure with 6 bedrooms and a wide porch and windows that let in the Arizona sunlight. "Remember that first little house," Benjamin said as they moved into the new place. 2 rooms and a leaky roof. "I loved that house," Josephine said. "That's where we started our family." "This is where we'll finish raising them," Benjamin replied, "and where we'll grow old together." Growing old together. The phrase filled Josephine with contentment. She was 35 now, Benjamin 38, and they'd been married for 12 years. 12 years of joy and struggle and love so deep it sometimes took her breath away. The store continued to do well, though Josephine had hired help to manage it more as the children got older. She still went in several times a week, still loved the work, but her priorities had shifted. Family came first now, always. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were in bed and she and Benjamin sat on their new porch watching the stars, Josephine would think back to that day in the dust storm, when a lonely cowboy had walked into her store and changed everything. She'd weep sometimes, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude for the life they'd built, for the love they shared, for the miracle of not being lonely anymore. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin would ask, pulling her closer. "Just how blessed we are," Josephine would reply. "How different my life could have been if you hadn't walked through that door." "I was thinking the same thing," Benjamin would say. "Best decision I ever made, taking that job at the Diamond Cross. Best storm I ever got caught in." They would sit in comfortable silence then, holding hands like they had that first day. 2 people who'd found in each other everything they'd been missing. Grace turned 16, beautiful and strong and sure of herself in a way Josephine had never been at that age. Young men started coming around, sons of other ranchers and townspeople, drawn by her beauty and spirit. Benjamin handled it with surprising grace, though he made sure everyone knew his daughter wasn't to be trifled with. "She's so confident," Josephine said to Benjamin one night after Grace had politely but firmly turned down an invitation to a dance from a boy who clearly wasn't right for her. "So sure of who she is and what she wants." "That's because she's never been lonely," Benjamin said. "She's never had to doubt that she was loved and valued. We gave her that." "We did," Josephine agreed, feeling proud and grateful and a little sad that her daughter was growing up so fast. William, at 14, was already helping with the ranch books, his head for numbers proving invaluable as Benjamin's business grew more complex. He was quieter than his sisters, more serious, but when he smiled, it lit up his whole face. Anna, at 9, was still their wild child, always climbing trees and riding horses too fast and giving them heart attacks on a regular basis. But she was also loving and kind, quick to help anyone who needed it, and fiercely protective of her family. "We did good," Benjamin said one evening, watching all 3 children together on the porch, laughing at something William had said. "We did," Josephine agreed. "We did really good." The years continued their steady march. Grace married at 19, a good man from a neighboring ranch who loved her fiercely and treated her with the respect she deserved. The wedding was beautiful, held at the church in Eagar with half the territory in attendance. Josephine wept through the whole ceremony, but they were happy tears, grateful that her daughter had found love without ever having to experience the loneliness she herself had endured for so many years. William went east to college, studying business and accounting, but promised to come back to Arizona when he was done. He wanted to help Benjamin expand the ranch operations, to take the family business to the next level. His letters home were full of plans and dreams, and Josephine treasured every one. Anna, true to form, announced at 15 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the few women pursuing such a career. Benjamin and Josephine supported her completely, knowing their youngest daughter would accomplish anything she set her mind to. As their children grew and started their own lives, Josephine and Benjamin found themselves alone together more often, returning in some ways to those early days of their marriage. But it was different now, richer, deeper, built on decades of shared experience and enduring love. "We're not young anymore," Benjamin said one morning, looking at his reflection in the mirror. His dark hair was heavily streaked with gray now, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. "No," Josephine agreed, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. Her own hair was more gray than brown now, her face showing the marks of time and experience. "But we're still here, still together." "Always together," Benjamin said, turning to kiss her. "I love you even more now than I did the day we married." "I love you more too," Josephine replied. "I didn't think that was possible, but every year I love you more." They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them, with dinner at the same restaurant where they'd had their first date. It looked different now, updated and expanded, but the Mexican family still ran it, second generation now, and they made a fuss over Benjamin and Josephine, bringing out special dishes and refusing to let them pay. 20 years, Benjamin said, raising his glass. To 20 more and 20 after that. To forever, Josephine said, clinking her glass against his. That night, lying in bed in their beautiful house, wrapped in Benjamin's arms, Josephine thought about the lonely woman she'd been 2 decades ago, standing in her store and watching dust devils swirl outside, believing that emptiness was all she had to look forward to. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she never would have believed it. A husband who loved her, 3 beautiful children, a successful business, a real home, a life filled with joy and purpose and connection. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked sleepily. "About that first day," Josephine said, "when you walked into my store during the dust storm." "Best day of my life," Benjamin murmured. "Mine too." She turned in his arms to face him. "Benjamin, I need you to know something. Before you came, I was so lonely I thought I might die from it. I didn't even realize how bad it was until you showed me what not lonely felt like. That first day when you held my hand, when you understood, I went home and I wept. I cried because I finally understood what I'd been missing, what I'd been living without." Benjamin pulled her closer, his hand stroking her hair. "I know, sweetheart, I felt the same way. We saved each other, you and I." "We did," Josephine agreed. "We absolutely did." More years passed, bringing changes and challenges and continued blessings. Grace had 3 children of her own, making Benjamin and Josephine grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. William returned from college and married a smart young woman he'd met back east, bringing her to Arizona and starting to implement his plans for expanding the ranch. Anna went off to veterinary school, one of only a handful of women in her class, determined to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Benjamin and Josephine settled into their 50s, still active and healthy but taking life at a slower pace now. The store was fully managed by others now, though Josephine still stopped by regularly, unable to fully let go of the place that had been such a big part of her life. Benjamin had turned over much of the day-to-day ranch operations to William, though he still rode out most days to check on things, unable to fully retire. "We're like old horses," he joked one evening. "Can't stand to be put out to pasture." "Speak for yourself," Josephine retorted. "I'm not old." "You're 52, Benjamin pointed out. "That's not old," Josephine insisted. "That's experienced." Benjamin laughed and pulled her onto his lap, something he still did regularly despite their age. "You're right, and you're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "You're biased." "Absolutely," he agreed. "But that doesn't make it less true." They celebrated their 30th anniversary with a big party, all 3 children coming home with their families, the house filled with noise and laughter and love. Looking around at the family they'd created, the legacy they were building, Josephine felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech," Grace called out, and everyone took up the chant. "Speech, speech." Benjamin stood, pulling Josephine up beside him. All right, I'll keep this short." 30 years ago, I was a lonely cowboy who didn't know what he was looking for. I took a job at the Diamond Cross and got caught in a dust storm, and I walked into a store to wait it out. Behind the counter was the most stubborn, independent, beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and the moment I looked at her, I knew my life was about to change. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes as Benjamin continued. "Your mother showed me what love was. She showed me what family could be. She took a drifter with nothing to offer but a willing heart and built this life with me. Everything good I have, everything I am is because of her, and I thank God every single day that I walked through that door." He turned to Josephine, taking her hands. "I love you more than words can express. You're my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children, the love of my life. Here's to 30 more years and 30 after that." Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, but Josephine only had eyes for Benjamin. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me what not lonely feels like." "Thank you for letting me in," he replied, and kissed her while their children and grandchildren applauded. The years continued their steady progression, bringing the changes that age inevitably brings. Benjamin developed arthritis in his hands, the result of decades of hard work, but he bore it without complaint. Josephine's eyesight started to fade, requiring spectacles for reading. They slowed down but never stopped, still taking walks together every evening, still holding hands like teenagers, still finding joy in each other's company. Anna came home from veterinary school with her degree and a fiancé, a fellow veterinarian who shared her passion for animals. They opened a practice together in Eagar, and Anna moved back home permanently, much to Josephine's delight. Grace's children grew, and her oldest started talking about getting married himself, making Benjamin and Josephine great-grandparents in waiting, a prospect that delighted and terrified them in equal measure. William took over the ranch completely when Benjamin turned 62, his father finally agreeing to retire properly. The transition was smooth, William having learned well from his father, and the Diamond Cross continued to prosper under new management. Benjamin and Josephine spent their retirement traveling, finally making that trip to see the ocean they'd talked about decades ago. They visited California, stood on the beach and watched the Pacific crash against the shore, holding hands and marveling at the vastness of it. "We did it," Josephine said. "We finally did it." "We did a lot of things we never thought we'd do," Benjamin replied. "Built a good life, raised good children, made it through hard times and good times together." "No regrets?" Josephine asked. "Not a single one," Benjamin said firmly. "Except maybe that I didn't find you sooner. But then again, maybe we both needed those lonely years to appreciate what we found in each other." "Maybe," Josephine agreed, "but I'm still glad those lonely years are long behind us." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." They returned to Arizona, to their home and their family, content with the life they'd built. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm, breakfast together on the porch, afternoons reading or visiting with family, evenings watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in colors that still took their breath away after all these years. On their 40th anniversary, too many people tried to fit into their house, 3 generations of families celebrating with them. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of love, and Josephine still felt her heart flutter when Benjamin smiled at her across a crowded room. "How did we get so lucky?" Their daughter Grace asked Josephine at one point during the celebration. "We chose each other," Josephine replied. "Every day for 40 years we chose each other. That's not luck, honey. That's commitment. That's love." "I hope I'm as happy as you and Daddy when I've been married 40 years, Grace said. "You will be," Josephine assured her. "Just remember that marriage isn't about never having hard times. It's about facing those hard times together, about being partners through everything." That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Benjamin and Josephine sat on their porch watching the stars, the same stars they'd watched for 4 decades. "I've been thinking," Benjamin said, "about that day I walked into your store. About how easily it could have gone differently. I could have gone to the saloon instead. I could have ridden on through the storm, but I didn't, and that made all the difference." "Fate," Josephine said. "It had to be fate, or God," Benjamin replied, "or just dumb luck. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it every day. So am I." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him even now, at 67 years old. "Benjamin, do you remember what I told you on our 20th anniversary? About being lonely and not knowing it until you showed me what not lonely felt like." "I remember." "It's still true," Josephine said. "After 40 years, I still wake up grateful every morning that I'm not lonely anymore, that I have you." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "You'll always have me, Josie. Always." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had for 40 years, 2 people who had found each other in a dust storm and built a love that weathered every challenge, every change, every year that passed. The next few years brought continued blessings. They became great-grandparents twice over, tiny babies that made them feel ancient and blessed in equal measure. Their children continued to thrive, their careers and families flourishing. The ranch prospered under William's management. Anna's veterinary practice became one of the most respected in the territory. Grace's children were all grown and starting families of their own. Benjamin and Josephine watched it all with pride and wonder, amazed at the legacy they'd created simply by choosing to love each other. They were in their early 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and spirit. Their health remained relatively good, though they tired more easily, needed more rest. They spent most of their time at home now, content with each other's company, still talking about everything and nothing, still finding new things to discover about each other even after so many years. "You ever wish you'd done things differently?" Josephine asked one evening. "Like what?" "I don't know. Traveled more maybe, seen more of the world." Benjamin considered this seriously. "No," he said finally. "Every choice I made led me here to you, to our family. I wouldn't change any of it." "Neither would I," Josephine agreed. "Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened to me if you hadn't walked into my store that day." "Don't," Benjamin said firmly. "Don't wonder about that. We found each other and that's all that matters." He was right, of course. They had found each other, two lonely people in a hard land, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their 45th anniversary was quieter, just immediate family, a simple dinner at home. Josephine had made Benjamin's favorite pie, and he'd picked wildflowers for her like he had on their first date, a tradition he'd maintained for 45 years. "To 45 more," Benjamin said, raising his glass, though they both knew they probably didn't have 45 more years left. "To whatever time we have," Josephine replied. "However long or short, as long as we're together." "Always together," Benjamin agreed. That night, lying in bed, Josephine traced the lines of Benjamin's face with her fingers, memorizing features she knew as well as her own. "What are you doing?" he asked sleepily. "Just loving you," she replied. "Love you too," he murmured and fell asleep holding her hand. Josephine lay awake a while longer, listening to his breathing, feeling the warmth of him beside her. She thought about the lonely woman she'd been 50 years ago, thought about all the years of loneliness that had come before Benjamin. And then she thought about all the years of love that had come after, and she wept quietly, tears of gratitude and joy soaking into her pillow. She had not known she was lonely until Benjamin showed her what not lonely felt like, and even after nearly 5 decades together, the recognition of that gift still moved her to tears. He had given her everything, this cowboy who'd walked into her store during a dust storm. He'd given her love and family and belonging and home. He'd given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, and she had given him the same. They had saved each other, two lonely souls finding wholeness in each other's arms. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Josephine's last conscious thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for the dust storm that had driven Benjamin into her store. Gratitude for his courage in speaking to her, in seeing her loneliness and recognizing it because he felt it too. Gratitude for every day, every year, every moment they'd shared. They lived on into their 70s, their love story becoming legend in Eagar, the lonely storekeeper and the drifting cowboy who'd found each other and built an empire of love. Their children continued to thrive. Their grandchildren grew and married and had children of their own. And through it all, Benjamin and Josephine remained at the center, the foundation upon which 3 generations had been built. They passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, both in their late 70s, having lived full, rich lives surrounded by love. Benjamin went first, holding Josephine's hand as he always had, and she followed soon after, unable to imagine life without her other half. At their funeral, held together as they would have wanted, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to celebrate 2 lives well lived and a love that had lasted a lifetime. The story was told again, of how Benjamin had walked into Josephine's store during a dust storm, of how they'd recognized each other's loneliness and chosen to heal it together, of how that choice had led to 52 years of marriage and a legacy that would endure for generations. "They were never lonely again," Grace said during the eulogy, tears streaming down her face. "From that first day until their last, they were never lonely. They had each other and that was everything." And it was true. Benjamin and Josephine had found in each other exactly what they'd been missing, and they'd built a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and retold by their descendants for generations to come. In the end, that's all any of us can hope for: to be seen, to be known, to be loved. To find someone who understands our loneliness and chooses to fill it with their presence. To build a life together that matters, that endures, that makes the world a little bit better for having existed. Benjamin and Josephine had done all that and more. Their story, which began with loneliness and a dust storm, ended with a legacy of love that would never truly die. As long as their descendants lived, as long as their story was told, the love between a lonely storekeeper and a drifting cowboy would continue, a testament to the power of two people choosing each other against all odds and building something beautiful together. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Benjamin and Josephine were together still, holding hands as they always had. Never lonely, never apart, bound together by a love that had transcended even death itself. Their great-granddaughter, named Josephine Grace after both her great-grandmother and grandmother, stood at their joint grave marker years later, reading the simple inscription, "Together always, never lonely again." She didn't know the full story yet, was too young to understand the depth of what those words meant. But someday, she would learn about the lonely woman and the cowboy who'd shown her what not lonely felt like. Someday she would understand that love like theirs was rare and precious and worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, she would find that kind of love herself, continuing the legacy her great-grandparents had started in a small store in Eagar, Arizona on a dusty afternoon in 1883. The story ended, but the love never did. That was the real gift Benjamin and Josephine had given their family, proof that loneliness doesn't have to be forever, that somewhere out there is someone who will understand, who will see you and know you and choose you. All you have to do is be brave enough to let them in, to take their hand during the storm and hold on tight. Benjamin and Josephine had been that brave, and it had made all the difference. Their love story would echo through generations, a reminder that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth working for, worth believing in even when hope seems lost. In the end, that's what love is, a choice to not be lonely anymore together.